Hey everybody, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. My name is Dan Dietrich. So glad you're with us today. It is Wednesday, and on a lot of Wednesdays, we talk about faith. We talk about our faith, our friends' faith, and what it means to what it looks like in the world to live a life of faith. And on today's show, we are so grateful to welcome back Common Good alum Laura Truax. Laura was one of our hosts for the Faith Wednesday show for a season, and she recently went on a 35-day silent retreat. And she sat down with Doug Pagitt to talk about that retreat, what she found in the silence, how hard it was to stay silent for almost 35 days, and the moments where she was like, wow, I've made a huge mistake in doing this. So it's a great conversation, and hopefully it's a gift to all of us that even if we don't have 35 days for silence and solitude, we can find some quiet moments in our busy days to find something beautiful. So let's jump into this conversation with Doug Pagitt and Laura Truax.
Well, hello, Laura Truax. So good to see you again, dear friend. And I've missed you here on the Wednesday conversations on the podcast. So nice to have you again.
Thank you. It's nice to be missed, Doug Pagitt. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, okay. So we last talked, I guess, in December. A lot has changed in your life since then. Then you were pastoring a church that you'd been at for a long time. That role has ended for you. You were about to embark on a 30-day silent retreat, which is what I want to talk with you about today and see how that went and what you learned and what those of us who won't be quiet for 30 days can glean from that. Sure. So a lot has changed. It was winter, now it's spring. Like just a lot is up in the air. So
Yeah.
How are things?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, let's get the numbers straight. I thought I was leaving on a 30-day silent retreat, and good grief, it ended up being 35 days. Okay. So I just want to get that out there because every day matters. All right.
Yeah. What happened?
Well, there were a couple of beginning days where you prepare yourself for silence. So you have a few hours of chit chat with your other retreatants, but then you have 2 to 2.5 full days of silence to prepare for the beginning of this 30-day St. Ignatius retreat. And then following that, you've got a day and a half of supplemental work, of kind of, consolidation work.
Wow.
So, and the reason every day matters is because there's a point in those 35 days where I really did feel like a prisoner on the wall. Like, let me just make my mark. Laura was here,
Yes. Okay, so what got you into this? You chose it.
Right.
You signed up for it. You rearranged your schedule. You paid the money. You prepared for it. Do you remember now what went on with you when you were thinking about doing this? What you were hoping it would be, and what the motivation was?
Well, I've wanted to do a silent retreat for decades, literally, in the Ignatian tradition. So this is St. Ignatius of Loyola. So, we got to go back to 1530s is when this guy is living and writing. But St. Ignatius was as a Catholic saint. He starts the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. So just like heads up for the listeners, right? That's his kind of nom de plume. He is a battle-scarred man who is injured in battle, convalesces for many years, and in the midst of that convalescence has this profound experience of God, experience of faith, and decides that essentially he will now be a soldier for the Lord. That's the Society of Jesus. That's their initiation right there. He in the middle of that kind of window of spiritual experiences, he devises what he believes is a God-given framework for someone attending to the voice of God in their lives. And he calls this the Ignatian Exercises. These are literally just exercises that a person might do who is interested, first of all, in joining him in this, I'd call it a crusade, but we've got so many awful connotations of crusade, but it's essentially a calling, right? Whoever's interested in joining him in this calling for God, calling of Christ. So these are exercises which are designed to help you hear the voice of God. Over the many centuries since Ignatius wrote that, there have been all sorts of different ways that regular people, people who are not in the convent life or monastic life, can access his spirituality. And it's called the 19 Annotated. So you can follow this retreat. I know. I'll stop here because I know I'm already in the weeds.
No, I
But
like it. I like it a lot.
you can do it over 9 months by doing this hour a day prayer with a spiritual director once a week, or you can do it in this consolidated way of 30 straight days, praying for roughly 5 to 6 hours a day. So that was the beginning.
Okay. Did you know? So let me pause you there and ask: did you know these the Ignatian exercises before? Had you been doing them and thought, I want to try them in a more compressed time, or I haven't really been able to get into them, so this is how I'm going to enter the
well, I think anybody who's gone to an Ignatian school, Georgetown, Loyola, Gonzaga, I mean, there's so many, right? Anyone who's gone to Ignatius school has been introduced to the Ignatian exercises. It's just part of the framework. They may abbreviate it for their retreat weekends, but it's a thing. It's a thing that any Jesuit high school or even or college for sure would have taught. I've done the longer 9-month exercises twice, and found it incredible. The first time was in seminary because I went to Loyola Seminary, and had a priest from Peru as my spiritual director. It was my first time of learning about liberation theology. It was my first time moving into kind of this broader suffering of the world. It was marvelous. So I'd known for years that I wanted to try and see if I could do it, see if I could engage in 30 days of silence. And with the terminating my role at LaSalle and moving out of that space, it just felt like an excellent opportunity. So January 3rd, I landed in Gloucester, Massachusetts at the Eastern Point Retreat House. There were 25 retreatants there, and 19 of them were Jesuit men in formation. So they were guys between the age of about 23 and 35-ish who were doing what would be the first of 2 retreats for them. They'll make this retreat as they begin their life as a Jesuit, and then they'll make it again at the 10-year mark, which will be when they are making their final vows to become a Jesuit for life. So it's 10 years of formation if you're a Jesuit, which is kind of incredible, right? I mean, in Protestant tradition, some kids preaches does a good testimony at 14, and we put them on the fast track, They're
off and running.
Yeah.
What are the exercises? Are they words you say? Are they what is the exercise?
Yeah. So there's 4 big movements over the course of 30 days. So think of it, the first big movement, which, and let me backtrack for a second, because it's only a few verses of scripture. There's not a lot of reading. In fact, you can't read. Your spiritual director will say, do not bring any books with you. You can't decide, this is the window where I'm finally going to read Isaiah. I've been faking it for 3 decades, but now I will read it, right? No, there's none of that. There's none of that.
Really?
Maybe you get a couple of verses of scripture a day, and that's it. The whole thing is designed around listening and being still. And so imagine that. Let's just put a pin on that one. Think about trying to be still for 5-ish hours a day. It's kind of wow, it kind of makes
my
me
anxiety is through the roof right now, just thinking those experiences. I know for a lot of people, they relieve their anxiety. For me, I feel I don't know, in something internal just goes, bonkers when I think about that.
Yeah, I hear that, Doug. And I'm kind of a flaming extrovert. And I was nervous. I was excited, but I was really nervous. I did know, to get into this program, the 30-day program, you've got to have done a few 8 to 10 day silent retreats over the past few years. So there was that. But I'll tell you, you get there, and about day 3, I thought, oh my God, this is such a mistake. This was such a mistake. I mean, how do I get out of here? And you're remote. I didn't have a car. I was like 5 miles from town. It was intense. It was intense.
Were you actually, I mean, I just imagine maybe late at night, if this, I can imagine because I've done things like this, you start almost plotting in your mind, like, okay, here's what I could do. I could walk down the road. I could go. Were you thinking literally, how do I get out of here? Did that?
Oh, yeah. And could I get out without them noticing? Like, could I get out without the public shame? I mean, first of all, there were only a couple of Protestants there. So, there's a part of me that feels like I got to show them that we can do this thing too. There's that weird, goofy,
a lot of burden,
whatever that is, right? Mm-hmm. And then also there were only 3 or 4 women. One was a spiritual director, but then there's only 3 of us after that, and then 19 guys, and they're all, I don't know, man, super focused. I mean, they're praying through the night. I would go down to the cafeteria to get some tea, maybe 10:30, 11 at night, and the flame is always burning in the chapel, and there's always some guy lying, flat out on the floor, and I'm thinking, oh boy, I don't know. I don't know. Goodness. This seemed like a good idea, but so I had that. And then, you talked about I'm leaving, this role that I loved. Near the end of last year, my husband had gotten this really terrible health diagnosis. So I was feeling very sad. I arrived January 3rd with just a lot of grief and kind of deep fatigue, that those things bring on. You just feel exhausted. And really, day 2 or 3, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to spiral into a real depression here. Yeah. It's cold. It's dark. They kept the thermostat at like 64 degrees. I mean, who does that? I mean, I would come by these thermostats and I would look around and like put it back up a few degrees just to get it to, human temperatures. But it was, I really thought I'd made a big mistake.
Okay.
So it did feel like a prisoner on the wall. The first movement of the retreat, and this actually answers your first question, like, what do you do? What's the framework? Well, there's 4 big movements. And the first big movement is Ignatius is inviting you to see how far you are from the glory that should be yours, how far off the mark you and this world is from how we were created to be.
Okay.
So you're to really consider the beauty that is, the goodness and grace and awesomeness there is. And then you're to examine your life in great depth. This is what you do for many of those hours that first week. You examine all those places in you that have been captivated by lesser things, grasping and defensiveness and hurt, and how you've built walls around yourself, and those places where the light has just not gotten in, or the weeds have grown up, and that's a humbling thing and a hard thing, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that the experience then of feeling this, I don't even know if I want to be here. I don't know if it must fit that first movement pretty well, right? Like whatever you're feeling is, this isn't right, and it's raising all that to the surface.
Yes, absolutely. I do think that's part of the genius of Ignatian spirituality, is that your mood really fits what you're thinking about in that first week.
Interesting.
Near the end of the first week, I realized a couple of things. One, I realized that something in me was shifting. And I hadn't seen it. I was kind of, you have to get a schedule for yourself or you got to go crazy, So I had a schedule. I had like my blocks of prayer time kind of laid out, and I tried to keep disciplined on that, because it's just like running or anything else, right? You've got to put some structure in place, or you're just going to flop around on your bed, for hours. So, but about 3 or 4, maybe 5 days in, the reflection prompt is to consider a person who you really admired, and think about all the traits in them that you admire, and how you
Oh,
gave yourself to this person's leadership and kind of place in your life. And for Ignatius, again, as a soldier, he was thinking of worldly powers. He was thinking of some ruler or leader in the world that you would be willing to follow into battle. You'd be willing to really organize your life around this leader's kind of role, you know. And so I thought of a leader and thought about the many hours I had given to this leader's electoral campaign or policies or whatever. And then you were to think a few days later about a leader who you really despise, and one who you thought was just awful, and how much you disliked that leader. And you were to bring that leader to mind and just sit with that. And I realized in bringing that leader to mind, the despised leader, that I actually didn't have any anger left. I had pity, and I had sadness, and I had compassion on that leader. And that was followed in the next few hours of prayer by all these other people who I am actively against their policies. I am actively against their legislation that they put forward. And yet, when I found myself, I'll just name one of them, when I found myself praying with compassion for Mitch McConnell, I thought, wow, something has shifted. This is not the same disposition. This is not the same framework I had even a month ago. So that was the ending of the first week. And I know, right? It was kind of a grace. It was absolutely a grace to see that I could go deeper than opposition, that I could go into a place of empathy and compassion and not oneness. I'm not trying to say that exactly, but I could go beyond anger. I could go deeper than that. And so that was the wrap up of week 1. Week 2, you move into the life of Christ. And over the course of those 7 days, you see little glimpses of Christ, and you're to imagine yourself in the text with him, going where he goes, doing what he does. And that was a very sweet week for me of just seeing how Jesus always leads with love, and how he just like never met a person he wasn't pulling for.
Let me ask. So when you're doing these exercises, are these self-directed, or are there words that you're given to recite? Are you just coming up with it on your own? Are you writing this down? Are you talking to anyone ever? Do you meet with a spiritual director and process any of this externally, or is it just all? Are you writing it? What are you doing those hours?
Yeah. So your senior spiritual director, I saw mine every day for 15 minutes a day. Which is like not enough. I was like clawing my way to stay in the room, please.
Yeah, did you just start talking the minute you walked in? Like, we have 15 minutes. I'm going to talk for 14 minutes and 55 seconds.
I'm on it. Pretty much. He didn't really say too much back to me. So that was, so it was me doing most of the talking. So how that works, Doug, is that you're given a few verses, and you're given like a sheet of paper. My spiritual director gave me a sheet of paper that had the big movement of today is to see these miracles as Jesus did them. For instance, this is one example. So I might have blind Bartimaeus, where Jesus spits into the dirt and puts the dirt on the man's eyes and he sees. Yep. So we may have 4 verses of that, and you would come back to that text, just those 4 verses, for 4 hours that day. So maybe I would be praying from 10 to 11 and 1 to 2 and 4 to 5 and 6 to 7. Each one of those prayer times, I would come back. I would spend the first 15 minutes just getting myself quiet, because that's how long it takes to realize, oh my God, would that guy stop breathing over there? Or will this guy
Are you sitting
quit?
in a room? Are you sitting in a shared room with other people around?
At different times I would be. Yeah, there were all sorts of small chapels. And that's your first challenge. My first challenge, Doug,
Yes.
was to not be irritated with all these people around me.
Totally. Oh,
This guy coughing or that guy, sneezing, and oh my God, it's incredible how you can be irritated about things that you didn't even notice for
yes.
most of your life. We also got to where you could identify people by how they walked into a room. Like you could be still with your eyes closed in prayer, and somebody would shuffle into a room, and I would think, oh, it's that guy with the felt slippers. I know what he's going to do right now. He's going to take a real long drink of water, and then he's going to noisily put the lid back on, and he's going to put it on the stone floor, and then he's going to like squirrel around.
This is awesome. Yes.
Yeah, so St. Ignatius had a few ideas around it. Like each time of prayer, he suggests, and I love this, and I've tried to still incorporate this. He suggests that when you get to your place of prayer, your identified place, that you stand in the doorway of that room and you look upon yourself sitting there before the Lord. And you think about, is the room warm? Is it cool? What will that floor feel like for me? Will I be standing for an hour? Will I be seated? Will I be laying on the floor? Will I be kneeling? What direction will I face? Will I face an open window? Will I face a wall? Will my eyes be open or closed?
Wow.
So you spend about 5 minutes preparing to even get into a place of prayer. And then you say the Lord's Prayer at the doorway. You get to that spot, you settle yourself, you spend however long that takes just listening to your breath, trying to get rid of some of the static that you walked into the room with. Then you read your scripture text. Well, okay, that takes 38 seconds. And then you reread it, reflect, put yourself in that spot, and then you're off to the races. That's where you remain. So for me, I set a timer for an hour. At the end of the hour, my little gong would ring in my ear. I would have my headphones in often. My little gong would ring. And then you're to reflect on that prayer experience. Like, how was that? How quiet were you? Were there pieces of that you felt like were of the Lord? What was your feeling? What was your affect through that prayer? Did you leave that time feeling consoled, or did you leave it feeling unfinished and staticky and nervous? And why? Why was that? What was emerging in you that you're thinking, damn it, why doesn't somebody listen to this blind guy by the side of the road?
Yeah.
Sometimes you would leave a whole hour and you'd be pissed off at these people, pissed off because that, man, that's what I would be. I would be saying, shut up,
Yeah. And are you writing these things down? Are you keeping track of them? Did you stop keeping track of it? Did you what?
No, man, you're the prisoner in the cell, Doug. You're writing for all it's worth.
Yeah.
I got like a book form of diary entries. Yeah. But there's,
and were you I don't want to be too, into the specifics, but I kind of want to paint a picture. Are you typing it in your phone? Are you writing it in a journal? Are you like thinking, I really wish I brought that better pen that I really like? What do you, how are you managing these hours after hours after hours?
Yeah, such a good question. Well, I thought of every possibility because, this is a no phone, no internet, no media of all kinds, no music, no, just nothing that you come in with. So I asked if I could bring my iPad with my little keyboard, because that's just a way easier way of me capturing things. And it also allowed me to take some photos of the place, because often I would be in a room or or anyway, it just allowed me to kind of remember where I was
Yeah.
and what was it all about. So I did take it on an iPad, with a keyboard.
Okay.
Other people were writing longhand. Most people were writing longhands. The Jesuits could not bring any electronic device, even an iPad. They don't own phones. They give up their phones. So I was a rarity with this iPad, but I'm glad I had it. It
And
took
they
me a
just
minute.
trusted you that there was no music on there and that you weren't sitting in the corner or at night falling asleep to the music.
Yeah, guess there is a little bit of trust involved. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I I there were a few big things that happened over the course of this retreat, and one that I just have to make sure I name, because I feel like if there is any evangelism in me, if there's any one thing that, man, I want to spend the rest of my breath talking about, it's what happened when I got to the third week, because the
Okay.
third week is an entire week on the crucifixion of Christ. And you follow, like, the Last Supper, the upper room. You're in the upper room for a solid 8 hours. I mean, it's 2 full days just in the upper room. It's 3 full days just at the foot of the cross. They just really stretch out that time. And I've never really understood the cross. I mean, I know I'm not alone. That sounds almost kind of stupid to say. Who understands the cross? But there's a lot of people out there who think they do, right?
Mhm.
And after I had gotten past the feeling that it's a penal substitution, it's an angry God, beating up the Son on behalf of our sin, I moved past that maybe 15 years ago. And what that has been replaced with theologically were things like, oh, solidarity with Jesus. This is just where a good life leads. He's gonna if you want to stand up for truth, this
Yeah.
is what happens. And this is what happens to Martin Luther King and all these other great, Oscar Romero and Jose Luciano, all these people. They just stand this long line of martyrs, right? Okay, that's powerful. That's always been powerful. But I've never really, I felt like I was always outside looking in at the
Yeah.
crucifixion.
Yeah.
And this year, I just, I don't know, something opened up in me. And there was this recognition, there had already been this recognition going into that third week, that God is just love. That's all God has. That's all God is. That everything Jesus ever did was just in service to, for the sake of love. That's literally it. And love in the sense that I am pulling for you. I am pulling for you. I'm trying to remove every distraction between you and love itself, because love itself is going to so permeate your life. It's going to so saturate you that you're going to see differently, you're going to hear differently, you're going to look differently, you're going to act differently in the world. So I was at that place by the time I got to the third week, right? And so I spent the first few hours just thinking about, how does this cross square with love? And I couldn't think of any situation where love didn't suffer. I couldn't think of any love I'd ever had. I couldn't think of any example of love that built into the very heart of it was not suffering. Love that I have for my children, love that as a child I had for my mom, love for a career, love for others, love for a partner. I mean, I just couldn't see any relationship or encounter
Interesting.
where built into the fabric of love itself is not this seed of deep suffering,
Hmm.
of being wronged, of doing awful things and needing a way of coming back from that awfulness. And I just saw Jesus on the cross as the world so far from God, where it's like when you're in a terrible argument and you're right and you're not going to give in, but somebody's got to. Somebody's got to. Somebody's got to say, we're going to stop this argument. We're going to come back together. I'm going to embrace you even when you're giving me the finger, because I know somewhere in you, child who is like lost to the wind, I know somewhere in you, love is going to find you, you know?
Yeah.
So it was this powerful thing that this cross didn't happen outside of the wholeness of God. It's not just it happens over here in the corner. It happens in the very heart of God. It is the being of God. It is the whole of the Trinity suffering on the cross. It is the framework, the constitutive framework of the whole world, is that if you love, you will suffer, and that suffering is where love is, and love is where suffering is. And I don't have words for it. Sorry, that's the best I can
Thank
do.
you. No, that is so wonderful. When you think back to it in those, I guess, those middle days of this experience, did those realizations come to you like in waves? Did they come to you in a moment? Was it something that you remember reading, or your spiritual director said, or how did it?
It was all of it, Doug. It was all of it. It was all tied together. It wasn't like illumination came simply in silence. It was illumination. It was my own memories that would be churned up at that time. It was a word from a spiritual director. It was the allness of life. And here's also what I learned. We don't have to go away for 30 days in silence to get that. That is what you're encountering every day. Every day on the road, there's a lot of static in front of it, right? Because there's just a lot of shitty static in life.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a sensory overload at any moment, but also in any moment, there is this deep illumination that is coming from within. It's that, I believe it's what Paul understood as that spirit bearing witness within. It's that random person that Jesus said is actually going to be me, that you're going to encounter. He said it in the prisoner and the hungry and the thirsty, but in Acts, they actually saw it as a stranger on the road. It's not just in the service piece. It's the random, like, wow, that was a weird thing to say piece, that actually is a divine messenger. I know I'm sounding kind of weird right now, but crap, that is it. That's exactly what this life is. I just had to get out of it for a minute to see that it's the totality of that. It's those random verses you might have read this morning, or that, arrow prayer that you shot up in the shower, right? At the same time that it's Shelley saying something over breakfast, and that person you met when you walked out the door. And all those things are the divine illumination, kind of revealing this path of love in front of us. God, it's awesome, Doug. It's awesome.
Okay, so I really appreciate the reminder that no, you don't have to go to a freezing cold, hard floored chapel and
right.
19, 23 to 35-year-old soon to be Jesuit priests to get there. But you did do that. That is one of the ways you were reminded or rekindled or re-engaged with this idea and these realities. How has it been since February, when you left that construct and have been in the rest of this? Is it increasing in its intensity? Is it changing? Is it dissipating? How does it?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are still very pronounced for me. One is, and part of life always, we try to always say that it's just about receiving. Yes, it absolutely is. I mean, muscle power Christianity, that day has come and gone. That's over, right? I don't want any more muscle power Christianity. But at the same time, there are things that I think you and I can do to receive, to be receptive, right? It's like you put on your glasses in the morning and you wipe them off, right? So there are some things that I still I'm trying to be very protective about, and one is this regular window of silence. I'd been doing 20 minutes of silence before I left as my own practice, my own spiritual practice, and so I'm very guarded on that still. That's an important window. It's the first thing I do. I wake up early just to do that. I gather with a group online. If any listeners are interested in this, very easy to do. Meditation Chapel has a ton of different groups out there. Just jump onto any of them that fits your time frame and just get into a quiet space for 20 minutes. And it's no more than just the Quaker ideas, palms up to receive, right? You wrote an entire book, I think, Doug, right, on the postures of prayer.
Yeah.
And I have that book, and I've used it a lot of times. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
But I just practice palms up. This awareness that it is all about love, that it's all undergirded in love, that there's nowhere we go away from love, that is still marked for me. I was at the Cubs game last night. They lost to Pittsburgh. Beautiful night. And I found myself just kind of tearing up at all these, it's so berserk, but at all these other people in the stand. And I just wanted to say, oh, if only you saw how beautiful you are, how glorious you are. I prayed that they would see one another as glorious beings. There's that book, On Earth We're Briefly Glorious. And man, that's what I just pray that my lenses would stay clear on that, because God, I really feel like I am in love with the world right now. I still am. It sounds stupid, but I am. I'm in love with the world, and I want to recover that message on a daily basis. It doesn't sound weird and like, oh my God, get away from me. I want to communicate it in ways that are true and authentic and unweird. So I'm still working on that one.
Do you have a sense about what it is in the silence that brings someone to that? Because the tendency can be that people are missing information, or they're lacking something that needs to come to them, an experience or an interpretation or a teaching or something. But people who talk like you do tend to say, no, when you remove those external stimuli, then you have this experience. So it's coming from, something. Do you have a sense of it? I know a lot of people are doing neuro testing and neuro understanding of meditation and mind and all that. How are you? Do you have a theory on it? Why silence, whether it's in the morning or for hundreds of hours on a retreat?
Yeah. I'll probably have to go kind of theological on this. Okay. I think we're echoes of God's being. I think we're echoes of the divine breath, that's how we were created from the beginning. We're stuff of earth that were only animated by the breath of the Spirit. And I think there's an echo of that. That's a very Celtic understanding that we're breathed out echoes of what? The Word. The Word. The Word was in the beginning. The Word spoke out, and we are that. We are those words. We're the echoes of those words. So I think, Doug, it's more of a recalling. I think there's something deep in our psyche that remembers, and that in the silence we're told we're not enough. We're told we've got to be more. We're told that we're totally depraved. We're told that we're so off the mark and so inadequate and so broken. And I'm not denying that it is a broken world out there. I mean, again, the whole week is on the magnitude of sin and how far away we are, right?
And the suffering that brings, yeah.
Right. But in the center of that, there is these sentient beings called human beings that are still the breath of God. And you just get away from some of the static just a little bit and you start to recall it. And then the more you recall it, the more you breathe into that, the more alive it becomes. It's like a hot air balloon, right? And it's got to fill all the way up with helium before it kind of can lift off. That's who we are. We're like these helium balloons, and we're going to be lifted off.
Well, it's really a wonderful imagery. It's reminding me a bit of a TED Talk that I saw, and then a book that the person who did the TED Talk wrote. Her name is Jill Bolte Taylor, and she's a MIT neurologist who had a stroke herself in her shower, and she wrote a book and a TED Talk called "My Stroke of Insight." Are you familiar with this?
No, I want to read it.
Yeah, and the TED Talk is worth watching. Because she's a neurosurgeon, she describes what's going on in the brain, and she was in her shower and had a stroke. And apparently when you have strokes like she had, you phase in and out of the hemispheres of your brain being dominant. So sometimes she's like, okay, I'm having a stroke right now. I need to get out of the shower and I need to call make this phone call. And then other times the left hemisphere of her brain would take over and she would start to have this experience like you're describing, seeing all things connected. And so she goes through these hours of this because she can't make the phone call happen. And anyway, so she narrates this and talks about it, and then says similar things to you that, hey, there are actually practices that you can do to aliven these parts of your body, your brain, to be more alive and take the lead for a bit. And so I think she suggests many of the same things, that somehow the analytical side of your brain, when input is coming in, then takes over, right? And you start taking in data and you do the thing you do, which we should do. But then there's this other side which sees all things. So she talks about, I think, as like the dissecting side, the break apart, and then the side of your brain that wants to bring all things together, and often the more artistic side. But it's, and I'm not trying to overly explain, I'm not trying to give a physiological reason for what you're describing, but I think some of us excuse away that, that's just some kind of people. Like some people can see the world that way. Some of you are just really gracious and you see the world through love, but I see the world, like there's a lot of this comparative thing that I'm just not like one of those people who can do that. Like I've been sitting here thinking I am absolutely not one of those people that could go for 30 days and do this. Like, I'm not wired like that, right? That's the excuse that one makes. Like,
yeah.
I'm not wired for that. And maybe there's just something about the typical human brain that actually is quite wired for this. And because prayer, even like I was sitting, I found myself doing this when you were saying I'd go to this prayer. And I probably even asked, because I feel like I asked this a few times, like, well, what did you say? Or what did you do? Like when you're praying, it feels like a verb. And then you would come back with like, you would like take this thing and then you would be there. I tend to call that like, I don't know, like meditation or contemplative thought. And so I don't even know if I'm just playing word games here, but I think for some people, when they hear prayer, they hear forming sentences.
Good point.
That's not really what you were talking about, though, was it? Like,
no. In fact, I had few sentences. I had impressions and images.
wow.
The Buddhist idea, Zazen, is about stilling your mind into utter emptiness, because in emptiness, they believe, is where kind of this deeper stillness of life dwells. So you might think about your breath first, and I'm not going to say this as well as they would say it, of course, but you might just start by just being aware of your breath and aware of your body, and then gradually just letting all these thoughts kind of die away and drift away. That would happen, but then soon I would have images, and that's okay. I will say this: prayer for sure was not about talking back to God. or listing anything. I became a Christian at a tent revival. And so prayer for, the first decade was ACTS, right? Adoration, confession, thanksgiving,
I
supplication.
forgot about that one. Yeah, right.
Yeah, hello. Remember that? Remember youth group?
The acts of prayer. Yeah, ACT.
Yeah. But it hadn't been that way for a lot of time, right? It's just about being present. It's almost like a companionable silence.
Wow.
It's like just sitting there, just sitting there with love itself. Yeah, I do think, Doug, it's not about how we're personally wired. I think there's a human being wiring. There's a human being physicality, and you may never do 35 days. Okay, let's just put it out there, 35 days. You may never do that, and frankly, I don't think I'd ever do it again. It was because I left feeling like satisfied and good, solid. If I really felt this strong urge, okay, that's different. But I don't think I will. I think I'm now called to. I'm called to be one of those people who saw something, and I'm just going to come back and I'm going to talk about it, and in the hope that maybe somebody else might go and see it too, and they may not do it for 35 days, but I don't know, maybe a listener is going to tomorrow morning or tonight, they're, instead of just getting in bed, they're going to sit on the floor or sit in a chair and put their palms up and be silent,
So how important was the accompaniment for you in that? Could you even mention that, hey, if you want to do something like this in the morning, go online and sit in silence with a bunch of other people looking at your, some screen, so you find solidarity, because it was a singular experience you're having, which is nonverbal. How important was the being near the man with the felt slippers and the noisy lid on his metal water bottle and the hard swallowing? How important was he as a character on this, a companion rather on this road?
Yeah, well, I do think we're created for community, right? We do know this. We're communal beings. So I would say that the piece of being with others is really important. And I think our churches, organized like Christian communities, seem to be at a crisis point right now. But I think we're always going to need just the companionship of others in our life together. So a Buddhist guy on my meditation call a couple of days ago texted me at the end of our time of silence, and he said, I feel like I bring my practice from Sri Lanka into this group, and it's just magnified. My little 20 minutes of being quiet and still is being magnified by these other 45 people and their stillness. And together we become a still point in the universe.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that's beautiful, Saju. Thank you. That's
when
it.
Did he say this to you, though? There were times where you could say things to each other in your 35 plus days?
No, in our chat. We are together every morning for 40 minutes.
I see. I'm sorry. This is the man just in this.
Yeah,
Okay,
so this is at the close of that time. So, I did my doctoral work on practices of progressive evangelicals. I was looking at church leaders who had been fired from their jobs, who had been ousted from their denominations because of their inclusive stance on sexuality. And I followed these people for a couple of years, and I asked them questions. What keeps you girded and, in the faith? I mean, why not just say, give them the finger and leave everything, And one guy, this is about 4 years ago now, one guy said, you know what? I've started a practice of silence, and I realized that I'm better being silent when I'm silent with other people. Mark Tidd from Colorado said that. And man, that's what led me on this quest. I started thinking, God, I think I'd be better in being silent if I was silent with other people. So found this little teeny community of Meditation Chapel online. Roger Sessions, the guy who kind of started it up, he's a guy who lives in Mexico, who just, he was doing his own silent practice and wanted some people to do it with. So he starts this little teeny website with $500. And now there's 8,000 people practicing silence all around the world. We don't know each other. I'll probably never see most of these people in the flesh. We have 140 different group leaders, and I'm one of them. And we just log in. I have a little reading. We do 20 minutes of silence at the sound of a gong, a little reading after that. And we talk about the reading. We sign off. That's it. It's beautiful. It's church every morning at 6:20 Central Time. It's church. We got a couple other leaders in that group now. And
do people keep their cameras turned on? They have cameras off? How do people do that?
Yeah, about half of them will keep their cameras on throughout the silence, so you see them still in front of you. Maybe a quarter will keep the camera off. They're maybe in their car or wherever, but it's profound. I don't miss it. I mean, I wake up at a little bit before 6 every morning to get it up, and people join from Sri Lanka to Ireland to the Philippines, all around the world. And you realize that this right now, today, that is the iteration, I believe, of what monastic life used to be, where you would pray through the hours. And the idea of the hourly office, the daily office, it came from the sense that monastics had, that they wanted to bathe the world in prayer. So all over the world, someone would be rising and praying. And as they were going to sleep, somebody else would be rising and lifting up their voice as the sun rose in their section of the world.
And again, these are prayers less like lists and requests or demands, and they're a human presence of being that might involve verbal verbalization or mental constructions of thoughts. But it's almost witness bearing.
Maybe that's a word people can resonate with. It's like bearing witness to this ineffable, transcendent, and yet utterly physicality of love that's right here. And as you bear witness to that, it really is like rising to meet the rising sun. The sun is rising, and so are you. And your life is being like saturated with this love, with this warmth.
And this one that you host on the meditation website, that's every weekday, 7 days a week. How often?
7 days a week. Yeah, 7 days a week. We've got 4 of us leaders now, so we trade off the days. But Central Time, 6:20 a.m. But you know what? I'll put that in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, say it out loud so people can look at it.
Okay.
It's
meditationchapel.org.
It's pretty simple.
And there's a couple of steps. You need to sign in, and that's a small thing. It's just giving your email. It's a little bit of a, security check. There's a huge calendar wherever you are in the world, wherever your listeners are listening to this podcast. They can go online. The calendar will reflect their time zone. And there's all sorts of languages, and there's all sorts of faith traditions. There's Buddhist groups, there's Zen groups, there's Celtic spirituality groups. There's,
Wow.
I mean,
what is this one categorized under? What's the setting of your little 6:20 a.m. Central Time?
Yeah, ecumenical Christian is who we are, but we have a fair number of Buddhists, so I'd say just ecumenical.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for sharing this, for bearing witness to it, for saying you're going to shout it from the rooftops as long as you can. It's really, really great. I thought about you a lot while you were in the middle of that. I mean, there would just be days where I would think, Laura is still not, she's still in this silent space. So it's, and that was just, that was 10 seconds, 5 different times over the course of the month, not anywhere close to what you were actually experiencing being in those waters that entire time.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. I receive all that. It all adds up, all those 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. I appreciate it. And if anybody's interested, man, there are good resources out there. Just open the door and you can be flooded with it.
Wow. Well, thank you, my friend.
Yep. Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
That was Laura Truax with Doug Pagitt. Great conversation, really inspiring. I loved the metaphor of the helium balloon that just needs a little more helium. Maybe you're feeling that same way, like just 15 minutes of silence might not cut it. I might need like a week of 15-minute sections of silence. So I hope you can find some of those quiet moments to fill your balloon and buoy your spirit, because things are heavy around here. We need these ways to, like Laura said, cut out the static, find some silence, and find some beauty and truth amidst all of this. Meditationchapel.org is the website. We'll drop a link in the show notes. And thanks for being with us today. Make sure you follow and subscribe, and tell your friends. If you've got a favorite episode, send them an episode. Share this with others. We'll be back tomorrow and Friday with more common goodery. And until then, have a good one.